Hello, friends. Well, hello, my friends. Happy to have you back here. This is the Improv and Magic podcast, and as always, I'm your friend LD Madera. In today's episode, I get to talk to someone I've admired for many years, and I'm so thrilled to be able to call this guy my friend. He is truly one of the greatest in improv. He's Mark Sutton. Mark has performed, directed, and taught improv for over 30 years. He's one of the founding members of the Annoyance Theater. He's performed and taught improv at Second City, both in Chicago and Toronto, and has performed at numerous venues and festivals all over the world. Mark also teaches improv to people in the academic and business world, and his clients include major companies like GE Healthcare, Major League Baseball, McDonald's, and Yahoo. He's also one half of the world-renowned show Bassprov, an improv show with two guys fishing, which he performs alongside improv legend Joe Bill. To watch and learn from this man is such a special honor for me. He and my friend Stacy Halal both played a pivotal role in helping me really understand what improv is all about when I saw them perform their duo show many years ago at the Miami Improv Festival. Because of that, Mark and Stacy changed my life forever. In this conversation, you'll hear about his love for the craft and his joy for sharing this with others, as well as the creation of Bassprov, the time he first met Mick Napier, and his great love for baseball. And so, my friends, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Mark Sutton. Well, I am so excited to be talking to the man himself, Mr. Mark Sutton. Hey, Mark, how you doing, my friend?
Good. How's it going?
It's going real good. Man, it's always a pleasure to see you every January in Miami, man. I mean, you're just such a blast to talk to, a blast to hang out with, and I can't imagine anyone that doesn't love Mark.
Oh, well, that's nice of you to say. It's we always say that the Miami Festival did it perfectly because everybody wants to go to Miami in January, right? So, we love going down there.
Yeah, David has the best marketing strategy ever. He just posts a graphic that says, "Where will you be this January?" And it's a picture of like Miami Beach.
Yeah, I love it.
How are you doing lately? What's been going on with you these days?
The summer's always a little slow. Try to spend as much time with the kids as possible, but now they're headed back into school, and we're just slowly working on a couple of things for, trying to get back in the game a little more, actually, trying to do a little more improvisation. My kids are older now, so it hopefully will be easier for me to perform a little more than I have been the last few years.
Your kids are very involved in sports, right?
They're both baseball players. Yeah, my two younger ones, and my older one. I have an older one he's like a grown man. He's on his own, has a job, the whole deal. So,
well, I know that you're a big baseball fan, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who's your team?
The Cincinnati Reds, who this summer's been really fun. We've gone to a couple Reds games, and nobody thought they'd do anything, and here they are. They're right in the mix with a month to go, so we'll see. There might be I might be watching more baseball in October than I have been in the past several years.
My wife and her family are big Cardinals fans because they used to live in St. Louis.
Yeah, it's all right. Nobody's perfect.
That's what my father-in-law would say about the Cubs. But then again, they finally won a World Series, so there you go.
Right. Well, it's hard. It's hard to live in Chicago and be a Reds fan. So that's
Is it really
the struggle? Well, for one thing, every time you go to the ballpark, they always assume you're from out of town because they assume that anybody who would live in Chicago is automatically a Cub fan. Or sometimes, so people will, I'll take my son and we'll be wearing Reds gear and they're like, "Oh, how long are you in town for?" And I'm like, I can walk home from here. I live 2 miles down the road. So yeah, you have to battle a lot of assumptions.
I bet. I bet. It's kind of like, people in Miami, they kind of automatically assume that everyone's a Marlins fan.
Hmm.
But the funny thing is, in Miami, not everyone's a Marlins fan, even
Right.
even the locals.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's such a new team, though, but they've had success. You got to give them that.
They had success in the past. I was in high school when they won their first World Series, and I remember it was like a whole city celebration. You know, they won a World Series twice and haven't really been able to pick up a third one, unfortunately.
They're doing okay this year, though. They're right in. They might make the playoffs too. They're right there for one of those wild cards. So
Yeah,
who knows?
finally.
Could be a Reds Marlins battle at some point.
That would be something. I went to their new stadium a few times, and it's
Mhm.
funny that stadium is interesting because you go there to do everything other than watch baseball, which is
Right, right.
hilarious. You
Yeah, I
go
got
there for the
there.
fancy restaurants and the nightclub, and it's like nobody's watching baseball over there.
Yeah, I have a goal to go to all the stadiums, right, to see a game in all the stadiums, and so I'm almost halfway, but Miami's on the list still. Miami and Tampa, so it's one of those you got to kind of do them together if you're going to make the trip worthwhile. So.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I took one of my trips to St. Louis because my wife has family in St. Louis,
Hmm.
and I didn't get to see a game, but I did get to see the Cardinal Stadium, and
Hmm.
and I really like it because it still has that old time baseball feel to it.
Yeah, I haven't been to that one yet. I went to the old Bush Stadium, but I haven't been to
Mm.
the new one yet.
What do you like in a baseball stadium? Like, if you had to design your own baseball stadium, like how would it look? How would Mark Sutton Stadium look like?
Well, I love the way the new ones are because you can still like you can leave your seat and go get a beer and stuff and still watch the game, which is
Mm.
great. Like at Wrigley Field, for instance, that's one of those old style stadiums where if you need to go get a hot dog or something like that, you go down the stairs and you're back behind the wall and you can only hear what's going on through the crowd noise or watching one of the TVs. But all these modern stadiums with the open concourse, I really love that because you can, I was just at Washington Nationals game not long ago, and you can stand there waiting in line for your beer and look out and keep watching the game, and I think that's made a huge difference in a lot of these ballparks.
Yeah, it's such a smart idea because you don't want to miss any part of the game at all while you're getting your
Yeah,
beer and stuff.
yeah, you're paying enough money, right? And now with the
Yeah,
pitch clock, the game goes faster, so you don't want to miss anything because you're not there as long.
right, exactly. Let's start with your early beginnings, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you grow up, and what was growing up like for you?
Ooh, I grew up in a really small town in Indiana called Tipton. Um, and Tipton is a little bit north of Indianapolis, if anybody knows Indiana. So I actually grew up about 40 miles away from Joe Bill, so that was our synergy.
Did you
Uh,
really?
yeah, yeah. And Tipton is a farming community. It's really small, 5,000, like I said, and lived in town. We didn't have a farm, but it was that idyllic 60s and 70s. I'd leave the house in the morning and not come home till dark and hang out with your buddies all day and go to the Little League Diamond and play baseball and do all that kind of stuff. And yeah, yeah, it was the typical small town Midwest upbringing, really.
Cool. I don't know this, so I might as well ask. Do you have any brothers or sisters out of curiosity?
Yeah, I do. I have four brothers and a sister, but they
Mm.
are all much older than me. I was I don't know if some people don't like the term mistake baby, but I was a surprise baby. I was my sister is the closest one to me, and she's 10 years older than I am.
Wow. What's it like being the baby of such a big family? Is there sort of like that? Do you get like all the attention, or do you kind of have to fight for attention?
Well, it was in this case because the distance was so big. It was really kind of cool because by the time I got to be like a kid, um, most of my siblings were out of the house, right? So at holidays and stuff like that, and my dad had family in the area. So at holidays, huge family stuff, right? All the brothers and sisters and several of my siblings were married already, so they had wives and my aunts and uncles were over. So and things like that, it was always like big family gatherings. But by the time I got to junior high, on the day to day, it was just me and my mom and dad. So I got all the advantages of having the entire house to myself, having my own room and not having to share with anybody and all that stuff. So it was really cool because you got a little bit of both sides when you wanted it.
You were an unofficial only child.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm an actual only child.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm an only child. My mom raised me as a single mom, and I had all the attention and love to myself. But my mom is an amazing person because she never got remarried or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that, but she was still able to raise me. So I think she did a pretty good job.
Oh, yeah. That's the, that I seriously, that's the hardest thing I can think of. I mean, my wife and I have great kids, but even with two of us, man, it's hard. It's hard to raise kids, and I can't even imagine doing it by yourself.
Yeah, I can imagine how she did it. And, she worked two jobs. There was at one point
Yeah,
where she was working at a bag lady at a grocery store at like till wee hours of the night.
yeah,
And, she was one of those moms where she put herself through hell, but it was all for me.
yeah.
She's like a very selfless person.
That's great. That's great.
Mm.
And she was always there for you.
Always, always.
I
And still
remember
is to this very day.
it makes me think of that movie Pursuit of Happiness
Yeah.
with Will Smith. I was
Hmm.
doing a corporate gig one time, and the speaker before us was that real guy, Chris, whatever. I can't remember the guy's
Oh,
last name,
really?
but he was giving a speech. He gave his talk and all this stuff, and then somebody asked a question from the audience, and they said, what are your son's memories of that time? Because he was really small. And he said, my son said one time in an interview that the only thing he remembers during that time was every time I looked up, you were always there. And
Mm,
I was like, man, that's pretty powerful.
that's really powerful. What were some things that you were into when you were a kid?
A lot of the same stuff I like now. I like, loved baseball, played baseball probably every day in the summertime. Movies. I went to the movies every Saturday. We had a little small movie theater. That's kind of how I think that's how I started getting that feel of performing and that magic, right? That uh, I would always go sit in the same seat, get the same popcorn and soda, and no matter what the movie was in the Saturday afternoon matinee, I was there. I was watching it. So I love to do that. Hung out with my buddies, loved music too. Had a little record player, played all the records, and yeah.
Were there any specific types of movies that really resonated with you when you were a kid?
Um, I don't know. It was weird because I felt like, and maybe it's because my parents were older and I had older siblings around, but I got exposed to a lot of different kinds of movies because like my older brother would be watching something and I would just sit there and watch it, or my parents would be watching something. So like even as a kid, I was watching movies that nowadays I can't get my kids to watch. I'll sit down with my kids and be like, "Oh, this is a great movie. You should watch this." I was just trying to get my son recently. I got on this like classic movies kick, and I was watching The Bridge on the River Kwai, and I'm like, "Oh, you should watch this." My son's a teenager, and he's like, "Ah, it's boring." And I'm thinking like, man, I watched this movie when I was like 9, and I loved it. And but now it's harder to hold their attention. But yeah, so I think I was fortunate in that way because I got exposed to a lot of different kinds of films as a young kid.
Hmm. Were there any types of films or any specific genres that you liked particularly?
I loved the war movies, and I liked the John Waynes and the westerns and the war movies. My dad was really into those, so I loved all those. The action and all that stuff. I liked like as I got a little bit older, I discovered things like Monty Python and stuff like that, and loved all that stuff. And but my favorite movie is To Kill a Mockingbird, and I remember
Mm,
seeing that as a kid. And when you're a kid, you only think about the creepy part, like the scary, Boo Radley down the street. And I really didn't understand like the complexity of that story. But then, I've probably seen that movie 25 times. And every time, you see a little bit more subtlety there. But yeah, I mean, that's another one of those where the first time I saw it was as a kid, and just kind of fell in love with the visual of it. I think it's one of the best black and white movies ever filmed. The way they use the light and the shadow and all that. I just I always loved that movie.
mm. It's really interesting how you can go back to a movie that you've seen hundreds of times and you always kind of see something that you didn't notice before.
Yeah, and I think it's because like the big things, your brain sort of is on autopilot, right?
Yeah.
When you see it again, so the big things you don't have to worry about as much, and you start to see the subtle things, um, which I love. It's another reason why I like watching sitcoms over and over again.
Hmm.
I went back recently and I watched when Seinfeld came on Netflix. I went through and watched all the Seinfelds again, but I would consciously watch like the background actors and the supporting actors. And there's so many tiny little things in those episodes that are just great that you don't notice until you watch them again. It's the same thing with I watched all the offices again, right? I watch The Office all the time. It's one of those things. And sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'm going to watch these 3 episodes of The Office and I'm just going to really watch Dwight. Even when he's not the focus of the scene, I'm just going to watch him. And man, you go back and look at those and Rainn Wilson is just brilliant in
He's a
all these,
genius.
oh my God, these tiny little things that he knows he's not the focus of the scene, but he's so committed to the character that he's doing them anyway. And then when you notice it, it's like, oh my God, this is hysterical. Yeah.
Yeah. Dwight is definitely my favorite character in The Office.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've binge watched The Office twice, both times against my wife's will, and but we both have a fond love for Dwight.
Yeah. And I'm funny too, because I was raised, again, the older siblings, right? So when my parents wanted to go out when I was a kid, they had built-in babysitters. They would just drop me off at one of my brother and his wife, and I'd hang out with them on a Saturday night. And that's where I first started seeing stuff like All in the Family and MASH and the Carol Burnett show. And again, I'm watching all these shows as a kid, and I'm learning, maybe subconsciously, about funny stuff. Like those were so well crafted and so well written, and just understood what funny was. And I'm just sitting there soaking that all in on the floor. Um, I know that I'm still influenced by all that stuff, even if I don't think about it all the time.
Hmm. Did you watch a lot of comedy when you were a kid?
Sitcoms and stuff like that, for sure. Yeah, yeah, I loved. Yeah, I still to this day like. My wife jokes with me because a lot of people, will have music playing in the background when they work, or like I cook a lot, so when I cook, for me, I have the TV in the background, and my wife will be like, "You've seen this episode of MASH like 15 times," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's sort of comforting. Because I don't have to look up to know what's going on. The visual is in my mind, and I'm hearing the words, and I just kind of know where it's going, like a song that you love." But yeah, I mean, MASH, Bob Newhart, Mary Tyler Moore, All in the Family, the Andy Griffith Show. I still love that show, and I just used to watch it all the time as a kid.
Mm. I've recently started to finally get around to watching the Carol Burnett show. I've always heard of it, but I never
Mhm.
actually disciplined myself to sit and watch it. And now I'm watching it and I'm like, holy cow, where has this been all my life?
Yeah, yeah. And you look back, and I don't know if you know this. This is a little trivia. Like Vicki Lawrence, when she was in that show, she started in that show when she was like 19 years old or 20 years old. She was a
Right.
kid. And here she is with these giants of comedy and just like nailing it all the time.
Hmm. And it's interesting how from the Carol Burnett show came the spin-off TV show Mama's Family, which I
Yes.
remember watching as a kid, and I loved it.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. That was a great one.
Oh, I loved Mama's Family. I would watch it every single night. I was a big fan.
Yeah. Well, it's I like it because shows like that, they sort of remind me a little bit of the original Annoyance mindset of like, we're not trying to teach you anything. We're just trying to make you laugh, and so many of those sitcoms, there came that time where it's like, oh, here's the heavy episode, right? Here's the episode you're gonna learn something, and that's okay, but I also love the shows. It's like, we're just here to make you laugh. And to me, that was one of them. It was just like, some of the notions were so ridiculous, but just the interplay between her and Ken Berry,
Yeah.
who's also hugely underrated comedian, so funny.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So when did you actually start dipping your toe into performing?
I did a couple plays in high school, so that was really sort of the start of it. If you don't count goofing around in your bedroom with the door closed and singing along to records and things like that.
You know what? I totally count that.
Okay, well then earlier. But yeah, I did a couple plays in high school, and but it wasn't something that was like, ooh, this is what I want to do, right? It was something that I had fun doing, and it was a cool challenge, and it was cool to, I always seemed to get the part that made people laugh, right? So all that stuff was cool and satisfying in the moment, but I didn't leave high school thinking, ooh, this is my path. I'm gonna do this for a living. I never thought that.
What was the path that you had set for yourself?
I wanted to be a baseball play-by-play announcer. That's what I went to school for.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, when I was 9, I wanted to be a baseball player, but that didn't work out because I discovered the curveball and discovered that I couldn't hit it. So that was the end of that. But I still loved the game. I wanted to, like, my idea at that time when I was like 17. I want to stay around the game, and I loved watching baseball on TV. Growing up as a Reds fan, I listened to Marty Brennaman all the time on the radio. I was like, man, Marty Brennaman's so good, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be the guy who brings the game to people, So I went to college at Indiana University, and that was my major. I was a broadcast journalism major with the goal that I was going to be a sportscaster and a play-by-play guy.
So was there any sort of performing while you were in college, or was it just kind of like, that's the fun thing I did in high school and now I'm moving on?
Well, not in the beginning, right? So it wasn't until fourth year. Was it fourth year? In my sophomore year, a guy moved into our dorm named Mick Napier. And
I've
Mick,
heard of that name.
Yeah. If you're an improv person, you've heard that name. So Mick lived a couple doors down from me in the dorm, and we became friends. And he actually wasn't a theater major either. He came to school to be a veterinarian, but was a theater minor. So he was getting his minor in theater. And so he did some plays, and the guys on the dorm floor would go see his plays and stuff like that. And he and I became pretty good friends over the course of a couple years. And then in our fourth year of college, I think it was, it's our fourth year. His third year, my fourth year. He decided with another buddy of his from the theater department. And by this time, Mick and I were roommates with a couple other guys in an apartment. They're like, oh, we're going to start our own comedy group. We're going to be a comedy group. And so they had auditions, and they did the deal, and they cast it. And that's where I met Joe Bill and Faith Soloway, because they were in the comedy group. But I wasn't in the comedy group. I just hung out and went to the shows and drank beer and watched these guys do sketch comedy in a bar at Indiana. And then there was a weekend where a bunch of them couldn't do the show. They had like a running show at this bar. And there was a weekend where like more than half of the group couldn't do the show because they were committed to something else. So Mick's like, do the show this weekend. Just do it. I'm like, I can't do that, Well, they talked me into it, and I did the show. And again, had a good time, but that was it. Like, we went away for the summer. Next year we come back, and it's like, you're in the group. You're doing it. So
you were basically drafted.
Well, a little bit, yeah. Because it was at that point, it was my 5th year at IU. I went for 5 years, and so I was only taking a semi-class load. I had plenty of time, and they're like, just do it. So I joined the group, and then we did comedy for an entire year there at IU. But then I walked away again, and I got a job in radio, and I was doing radio, and I was a reporter and an on-air personality at this little station in Indiana. And meanwhile, Mick and everybody started coming up to Chicago. They were making their way up to Chicago and taking class at IO and Second City. And then I started getting the phone calls, right? Like, hey, we're doing this again. You should move to Chicago. You should move to Chicago and just let's do it. And I was at a point where it's like, man, I've spent a lot of time getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be on the radio at 5:30 in the morning, getting kind of tired of it. What the hell? I'm going to move to Chicago, see what happens. And so that's, that was my step back into the water, and I never left after that.
And so when you went to Chicago, what happened? What did you end up doing?
We had started this group called Metroform at the time. That was the original name of the group. And the first show they did was a show called Splatter Theater. And it was like a parody of horror movies. And that was Mick and Joe, and Dave Rosowski was in that show, and a bunch of other people. And I just helped out because that's right around the time I moved. So they had already cast the show. So my first theater experience in Chicago was backstage. I did the props, and I helped do the blood effects, and I, was a dog wrangler because Mick's dog used to be in all the shows, and I did a bunch of stuff like that. And then the next year, when they did the show again, I was cast in it. And then the show after that was Co-ed Prison Sluts, and then it just started rolling from there.
Splatter Theater, I've heard a lot about. And actually, Dave Rosowski does talk about it in his new book. And it's one of those shows where you kind of had to see to believe, from what I understand. And I love the concept. It starts off with a completely white stage. And by the end of the night, that stage is completely red.
Yeah.
What were some fond memories that you had of doing Splatter Theater?
Oh man. I don't know if this is a fond memory, but I still can't stand the smell of chocolate syrup.
Really?
Because the blood was made with varying degrees of food dye and chocolate syrup. And so I was one of the people that got murdered. And my death, everybody had a different death, right? It was all very theatrical. And my death was that I got a jack-o'-lantern stuffed down on my head. And then Joe, who was the killer, would take a fake knife, and go around the jack-o'-lantern, right, and cut off the top. And then he would take because they were all so stupid, he basically would cut off the top of the jack-o'-lantern, and blood would fly out like he was doing my head too. And then he would take an egg beater and do one of these things with the egg, right? And that would be my brains, and he'd pull some stuff out because there was a pan sitting in there with all this crap in it. So by the end of the show, when everybody falls out of the closet, because that was one of the bits at the end of the show, was that as the heroine is trying to escape the killer, there's a tiny little closet on stage with a false back. And every time she opens the door, somebody else who got murdered falls out of the closet. So there's all these bodies on the floor. So my entire face and head and everything are just covered in this fake blood. And it just, oh God, the smell, so bad.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing. I have to ask this question since you mentioned him. What was Mick like when you first met him back in the day?
Well, I like to say that I've known Mick for so long that I knew him before he smoked or drank. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He was from a small town in Ohio. I was from a small town in Indiana. Um, and he was in many ways similar. Like he still had that kind of edgy sense of humor and that kind of acerbic attitude. But always, I always used to say at the Annoyance that Mick seems mean but is really nice, and I seem nice but I'm really mean. That was kind of our reputation when we ran the Annoyance together.
So you were the yin to his yang, basically.
Yeah, I did the mean stuff, and he was the mean gruff guy who did the nice stuff.
So at some point, there had to have been, I'm assuming, something that made you say, you know what, this improv thing, this really is for me. Was there a moment where that happened for you?
Um, yeah, I think it sort of went a little more slowly than that, right? So we were doing these shows, and some people don't know, Annoyance shows were a little bit different. So Annoyance was built around the original concept, sort of the compass, and that is that we used improv to create plays. So most of the shows that people saw when they came to Annoyance back then were plays, and a lot of them were musicals, and they were all original, like full-length pieces of theater that were co-created by the cast using improvisation. So we didn't have a lot of like straight up improv shows like IO did, or sketch shows like Second City. We kind of had our own little corner of the market there, and we had done a few of those shows. And at that point, I still didn't know what I was doing. I didn't, I had no idea really what I was doing. I just kind of along for the ride, and then I started getting a little better and a little better, and then before you know it, we're doing really well, and we're doing a lot of great shows, and it's super fun, and the place is packed, and you're really affecting the audience, and you get to that point where it's like, well, man, I don't know if I really like doing anything else, so I might as well keep doing this. And that's sort of how it went for me.
Hmm. Were you part of the founding of Annoyance Theater?
Pretty close. Like I said, I wasn't in that original Splatter Theater show, but we did 3 shows under the title of Metroform, really. The 2 splatters and co-ed. And then the theater that we were in at the time, we went out of business. Like the building got taken over, right? And we lost our space, and we found a new space. And when we found this new space, we called it Metroform's Annoyance Theater. So the name of the company in our mind was still Metroform, but the name of the building was the Annoyance Theater. But then that's when we sort of hit the creative jackpot with the Brady Bunch and a bunch of other shows, and we became really popular really fast. And everybody just started calling us the Annoyance Theater Company, and it sort of went like that. So, we've been pretty loose around who is a founding member, right? Like anybody who is around sort of in that transition from Metroform to Annoyance is sort of considered one of the founding members.
I see. Did you end up taking any classes at IO or Second City or anything like that?
No. This is the Mark Sutton. Some people know this. I don't know if you know this. You might not know this. I think David Christopher knows this. It's the Mark Sutton dirty little improv secret. The first improv class I was ever in, I was teaching it.
Really?
I've never taken an improv class in my life. I've taken a couple workshops, like at festivals where somebody else is there, and I'm like, ooh, I'd love to sit in and listen to this class or whatever. But I never took training at IO or Second City or anywhere. I just learned by doing.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
I did
most
not know
people
that
don't.
Well, now a lot more people will.
when you're first starting out and you're trying to get gigs as a teacher, it's not usually one of those things that you tell people. But you have to build a reputation a little bit before you start revealing that one.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because usually, everyone's website always says, "Oh yes, he studied at Second City and IO and stuff like that." So,
Yeah, but and I think it all depends on what you consider training, right? I mean, I performed all the time with people like Rosowski and Mick and Joe Bill and Eddie Furman, and and back in the day, you would do like people would drop in on your shows and stuff like that, and we had Martin DeMott was one like an artistic consultant at Annoyance, so I didn't take a class with any of them, but I learned from all of them just by being with them and being in front of an audience and having to meet those expectations together.
hmm. So when you were watching improv, what were some of the things that you were picking up on as you were seeing these shows?
Um, I think for me, I always gravitated toward, I think most people do, gravitated toward people that sort of remind them more of themselves. Like they can sort of see themselves in that part. So I enjoyed watching people like Kevin Dorff and Scott Adsit and people who were oftentimes sort of the observational, like I'm going to pick my spots and toss in the magic here and there, that kind of stuff. Um, so those were the kind of people that I started to gravitate toward and watch how they played. Because they had sort of that patience and calmness that I thought, ooh, I can do that. That's in my wheelhouse. Whereas watching somebody like, like when I first came to Chicago, somebody like a Chris Farley, you look at and go, no, I can never do that. I can never do that, right? And ironically, the first improv show I ever did in Chicago, Joe Bill tells this story sometimes. I had totally forgotten it until Joe told it in front of a bunch of other people. But I was still living in Indiana, and Joe and Mick and Rosowski and another guy, Eric Waddell, I came up to visit them, and Joe Bill was doing this sort of half improv, half stand up show at this place called the Roxy. And it was like a 2-part show where he's like, oh, we do 3 stand ups, and then we take a break, and then we do some improv. He's like, you come by and check it out. And it's like on a Monday night. And I've really hardly ever been to Chicago before in my life. So I go in, and it's Mick and Joe and my friend Eric. We were all in the group together in college and a bunch of other people. And I watched the stand-up, and he's like, okay, come improv with us. And the only improvisation I'd ever done was the short-form stuff that we did with our group in college, because we did like a sketch/improv show. So I had played different games, and we had made up games on our own and all this stuff, but it was all very game and short-form oriented. And Joe, being Joe, like looks at me 2 minutes before we go on stage. He's like, we're gonna do a Herald. And I'm like, what? I'd never heard of a Herald. I'd never really heard of long form. I didn't know what IO was. I'd never heard Del Close's name. Nothing, right? Nothing. So I go up on stage with these people, and some of them I knew. I knew the guys from college, and I knew Rosowski, and I knew a guy named Richard Label. But then there were 2 guys that I didn't know. So we start doing this Herald, and Joe he's like, it's 3 scenes in a game, 3 scenes in a game. You'll get it. I'm like, great, right? So the opening starts, and I'm hanging way back because I'm terrified. Opening starts. I barely participate. First scene goes, second scene goes. Here's the third scene. So I haven't left the wall. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? So these 2 dudes, and it's the 2 guys I don't know, they come out and start doing this scene that's like on a ship, right? And they're killing. These 2 guys are killing. And I'm like, oh, fuck, I don't know what is happening. And one of them turns and he's like, oh, let's bring the cabin boy over. And he pulls me into the scene as the cabin boy. And I play with these 2 guys, and it's my first long form improv scene in Chicago. And I muddle through the rest of the show, and it's fine. And then we go out drinking with one of the guys. Well, I find out when we go to the bar afterwards that one of the 2 guys is Chris Farley. And the other guy...
What?
Yeah. And the other guy is Mike Myers. So,
what?
And that's the first time I'd met either one of them. And my first improv scene ever in Chicago, I did with Chris Farley and Mike Myers. And I had absolutely no idea who they were.
Wow.
Crazy.
That is so crazy. Man, what an amazing thing to have happened. But of course, since then you've definitely embraced long form after that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Do you think that's what it takes, like when it comes to being a performer, and especially when it comes to long form? And I know long form has been a lot more popular now because back in the day it was mostly short form, short form, short form.
Mhm.
But do you think it takes a big leap of faith to just go out there and just try this thing and embracing the unknown?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest part of it, right? I used to teach beginning classes at Annoyance, and and I still talk about this sometimes in other classes. Is that it's once you've done it, like you and me, like once you've lived in it, it's such a freeing and beautiful thing. But you always have to remind yourself about that beginning part, where to somebody that freedom, to a lot of people, that freedom is terrifying. And I remember like having flashbacks to beginning improv classes where you have two people go up and I'd be like, okay, you know just start a scene. Well, where are we? Anywhere you want to be, doesn't matter. Well, what are we talking about? Anything you want. Well, who am I? Anyone you want to be. And for me it was like and that's part of my learning process as a teacher, because I was like, do whatever, it's total freedom, but not realizing that total freedom to some people is like, oh my god, what are you doing to me, right? I need a little structure. And I think that's really, for me, like that was the real service of the Herald back in the day, was that it allowed people to dip their toe in that freedom while also understanding that there was structure. And that helped relax a lot of people, because it's like, okay, here's my job, but within that job I have some freedom. And then the more you get experienced and the more you are comfortable with who you are as an improviser, the less you need that structure, and the more you just want the freedom, and you know that the structure will come organically no matter what.
Do you find that you enjoy more the structure or the freedom, or are you kind of in the middle?
I like figuring out as we go what the show is, right? So I never was one who enjoyed like, oh, we're doing this form. We're doing this form, right? Knowing going in, it's like, this is the form we must accomplish. I never really got into that, because then I always felt like, and like a lot of people do, I think, that I was serving the form more than I was being in a space of inspiration. But I love being an inspiration and then seeing opportunities to create a structure. Oh, here's a callback. Here's a through line that's happening organically that I'm going to grab a hold of and elevate, right? Or here's a button that I'm going to bring back around from this kind, what seemingly was a free form improv like Bassprov. Here's a way that I'm going to close this out really definitively, that just is coming to me right now in the moment, but I can see all these dominoes lining up. So I love that stuff.
You mentioned Bassprov. I'm a huge fan of that show. It's the show that you do with Joe Bill.
Mm-hmm.
When I was talking to Joe Bill, we got into how Bassprov got started, and he mentioned how it was something that was kind of different from what was going on, because it was part of a bunch of different shows, and it was something that was very different. So I was wondering if you could speak to the beginning of Bassprov. Where did the idea come from, and how did that whole thing get started?
Yeah, so I love this story because it made so many people angry. Not Bassprov, but just so we did a show many years ago at Annoyance called That Darned Antichrist, and it was it was kind of a takeoff. We were talking about sitcoms earlier. It was a takeoff on, like, the inspiration was, oh, the goofy sitcom with the wacky neighbor, right? Well, what if the wacky neighbor family, one of them was the Antichrist? Like, what if that happened? And it was a musical, right? So we create this musical called That Darn Antichrist, and it's about this single mom who lives on a houseboat with her 3 kids, and each of the 3 kids is messed up in some way. But one of the kids is the Antichrist, and they don't know it yet. And I'm one of her former lovers who's come back to try to, get back in her good graces. And I'm the dad of one of the kids. And so there's a scene in it where I'm teaching this one kid how to fish. He doesn't know how to fish, right? And Joe Bill played a pig. So Joe Bill played this character. He was in a giant pink pig suit, and he was on stage all the time for no reason, like never said anything till the very end of the show when it was revealed what he was really doing. And sometimes that scene, because the cool thing about Annoyance shows was that structure again, right? You had beats in the show that you had to hit to make the show go, because you had to get from scene to song or whatever, because a lot of them were musicals. But within that structure, you could play around a little bit. Well, this scene, the fishing scene, sometimes the playing around would get a little bit extensive. And so this scene that normally, some nights it'd be 10 minutes long, some nights it'd be 16 minutes long, depending on how much we were goofing around. And so people would be backstage like, oh, God, would you guys just do the scene? So any scene from that point on, this is in the early days of Annoyance, any scene from that point on in any show that started to stretch a little bit was referred to as a fishing scene. That became like the vernacular. So if you were hamming it up a little bit, you were doing a fishing scene. Well, then we were doing this show called The Screw Puppies, which was our big late night improv show. And one night Joe and I are backstage. And he's like, hey, let's do an actual fishing scene. So we go out, and The Screw Puppies was an improv show, but it looked to the audience like a sketch show. Because instead of editing, the lights would go up and down. So the lights come up, and Joe and I are sitting in two different chairs, and we're fishing. And we could hear people backstage like, oh, my God. Like, everybody was like, no. But we start doing this scene, and these two characters that eventually become Donnie and Earl just start to come out of us. And we do the scene, and it gets some laughs. And so then that became a thing that occasionally in Screw Puppies we would bring back every once in a while, and the lights would come up, and here those guys would be. And then the theater closed down, and everybody's kind of doing their own thing, and we had a low period there of about 5 years. And shortly into that low period, I was working with the Chicago Improv Festival, and I told Jonathan Pitts we used to do this thing called Improv Till Dawn. It was an all-night improv thing. And I said to Jonathan, I said, hey, Joe Bill and I are working on this new show concept. Can we get a spot, just try it out at the festival? He's like, yeah, we'll put you in Improv Till Dawn. You get 20 minutes, just try it out. Who cares, right? I'm like, great. So as soon as Jonathan said, you've got a spot, I called Joe and I said, hey, we have a spot in Improv Till Dawn. We need to think of something. Because we hadn't thought of anything. And he's like, well, let's do the fishing thing. So we kind of knocked it around a little bit, played around with a couple different concepts. And we actually did it once at I.O. as like a tester. And then we did it in Improv Till Dawn at like 4 o'clock in the morning. That was our time slot. 4 a.m. at the playground. And the place was standing room only. And the show went really well. And we walked out, and I'm like, Joe, I think this is something. Like, I think this is something. And we started working on it a little bit more. We did a little more in Chicago. And then that was at the time when Asaf Ronan had that what it was, Yes And on the internet, right? Mm-hmm. Back in the early days of all that stuff. And I just put on Yes And. I was like, hey, Mark Sutton here from Chicago, Annoyance. Joe Bill and I have this show. We'd like to come to your town and maybe do it and teach some workshops. And within 24 hours, I had like 8 different places like, yeah, come here, come here, come here. And that's how we first came to Miami, and we went to Memphis, Tennessee, and that's sort of how it started rolling.
What I love so much about Bassprov is that it's the most honest improv that I've ever seen. And I also love that, there's a lot of shows where teams create kind of like the gimmick, almost like they're doing their own herald. And it's like, oh, we're used car salesmen. And, they're trying to pitch you on selling this car. And then, okay, now we're going to break out into scenes and we're no longer used car salesmen. We're now different characters. But I love that the entire show, you and Joe just stay in the boat the entire time. You do get some input, but they're just more like fuel for the conversations.
Yeah, that was a decision that we made early because when we were trying it out, we thought about that concept. Like, we're like, oh, what if we, we're talking about, something that happened earlier in the week and we hop out and we play that scene and then we hop back in, right? And we tried that like in just sort of kind of a loose rehearsal type thing. And it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right to us. And we're like, nope, let's just stay in the damn boat and see what happens. And I remember doing the show in the very early years at the Orlando Festival, and one of the other acts there was Jeff Davis was there for some reason. Jeff Davis, who is in Whose Line and all that stuff now, and Jeff's been a friend of ours for a long time. Joe for way longer than me, but he was at the festival and we were sitting drinking after the show, and he goes, "We're at the bar," and he's like, "You know what I love about this show?" He goes, "I love that in the first minute, you guys basically put your foot in the bear trap. And then you spend the whole show just wait until the bear trap opens up so you can get out." And it was like, yeah, because we're like, yeah, we didn't want to leave the boat. We just wanted to see what would happen if we had to weave this piece of theater just out of two guys sitting there talking.
I asked Joe this, so now I'll ask you this. Is there a particular beer of choice when you do Bassprov?
Early on, it was Bush. Bush was sort of the official beer of Bassprov, but now it's harder to find. So sometimes it's PBR. Yeah, but if we can find Bush, we'll drink the Bush. Yeah.
So that's definitely your preferred beer when you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like a two guys fishing in Indiana beer.
It definitely does. It definitely does.
Yeah.
I was recently talking to Stacy Halal, our mutual friend, and I shared this with her, and now I'm going to share this with you because this is something I've never told you. But you and Stacy played a big part in my re-understanding of improv, because you have a show that you do with Stacy, and it's a format that the two of you created called a comedy, a tragedy, and a romance.
Right. In every life. Yeah.
And the show that I saw you two do for the first time was at the Miami Improv Festival. And I say this to people all the time. That show completely changed my life.
Oh, man.
It absolutely changed my whole view of improv. And the scene that sticks out at me the most was that second scene. And I don't know if you remember it.
Oh, yeah. I remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was that. I will say that was one of the more intense nights of improvisation I've ever had. I remember a little bit about the third scene, and I remember nothing about the first scene, but I remember that middle scene for sure. And I remember when it sort of turned and got really intense, and then but the biggest thing I remember is that when the lights went down to transition from scene 2 to scene 3, I looked down at my hands and I was literally shaking. Like I was so like adrenalined up from that scene that I had to just be in the dark for a second and calm down to move on to the final scene. Yeah. I remember that show well.
Man, and I said this to Stacy, I'll say this to you, just thank you for that moment, because that really transformed me. And whenever you guys are here at the Miami Improv Festival, I tell people, go see that show. It changed me and it will change you.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a fun show to do, and it's funny. There are just people who, Stacy and I never see each other. And she lives in Oregon, and we probably did that show. It was a show we only did at festivals, and we did it. I remember we did it in Canada a couple times. We did it in Florida a couple times, and I think we might have done it in Chicago at the CIF, but we only did it a handful of times. But man, you find those people sometimes where, a couple of years ago when we came back after the pandemic, and Dave asked us to come back and do the show. And it was like, I probably hadn't seen her in 3 years. And I step on stage with her, and it's like, we're right back in it. It's like no time has passed. The chemistry that we have, I think, is really cool because it's just as soon as the lights come up, we are instantly connected, and there's nobody can do anything wrong. It's great.
It is like watching a master class. It really, really is. And watching you perform in Bassprov and comedy, tragedy, and romance, and everything else that you do, you definitely get a sense that you're not afraid to be patient in your scenes. You're not afraid to just sit there and even not say anything. You're not afraid to just be there. Is that something that you consciously try to do, or is that just kind of natural for you?
No, I think it's something that took a long time to figure out, right? And I think this happens with every improviser in something. For me, it was in this, but I remember it's at one point just kind of, I was 4 or 5 years into Chicago and just sitting there going, man, I don't feel like I'm getting any better, right? Like I'm having fun and I'm doing shows and it's all good and I'm hanging out with fun people and we're having a blast, but I don't feel like I'm getting better. And I started just like kind of thinking about how I was doing it and talking to a couple of people I trusted. And, I think that's a great thing to do for people. Even when you feel experienced, to find somebody you trust and just be like, can you watch me and just tell me what you see? Because I can't see it. Right. And I had a couple of people, and I think Mick was one of them. He said, you're always going for the funny. You're always going for the joke. Let the joke come to you. And I was like, okay. And then I started thinking about that and started to reframe my mindset of like, oh yeah, they say that about athletes. I was always into sports. It's like the best athletes let the game come to them. They don't try to force the game. They let the game come to them. They know their time is coming. And the more I started thinking about that, it's like, okay, that's cool. And the more experienced I got and the more comfortable I got as a performer, the more, and everybody gets to that point. This. It's like, I don't need to prove anything to anybody sitting out there. Like, I'm not, and it sounds kind of cocky and arrogant, but it's like, I'm not doing this show for you, the audience. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because I need to do it, and it's something that I need to say. And if you like it, awesome. But I'm not going to steer this show to make you happy. The show's going to be what it is. And once I started relaxing into that, then I did become more patient, and I became more thoughtful about how I said things, and knowing that I didn't need to say anything. It's like, and it's weird. It's different with Joe because there's only 2 of us, but it really helps me when I'm asked to sit into a larger group. Because it's like, cool, man, if I don't get a single laugh in this show, I don't care. If I can help you get a laugh, awesome, right? And I'd love to get laughs, but I don't need them. So I'm just gonna fill whatever role needs to be filled right here. And I'm gonna take my time, and I'm just gonna wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I heard an expression recently that the best improv gives you the laughs when you need it and not necessarily when you want it.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah, it was Kevin Hart that said that, actually.
I love it. And I think that all just comes of being present. Because if you're present and you're listening, you'll know when something needs to change, right? When the laugh needs to come.
You've had the opportunity to teach a lot of improv classes and improv workshops all over the country and different parts of the world. And I imagine that you'll get from time to time the improvisers who are trying to do the opposite of what we're talking about, trying to force funny into the scene. How do you manage to kind of steer them away from that? And what guidance do you give to those type of performers who are always trying to push funny and push funny and push funny?
Yeah. I think similar to Rosowski a little bit. I really, in my teaching, have evolved into somebody who I really push people to just be connected with their partner and the moment, right? And I think a lot of that you're talking about comes from the desire of the performer to see the results, instantaneously, to push towards a resolution. I'm going to say this, and then this is going to happen, and everybody's going to laugh or whatever. And the thing about that, and I used to say this in my annoyance class all the time, is the results aren't up to me. I'm only one part of this equation. So the more I start projecting forward, the less control I have. And then I'm really pushing an agenda, trying to get control of the scene, even in my own mind. And I just, like, for me, that never worked. It didn't work really well. And so I like to at least give people who I teach the exposure to know that there's another way. And, and it's like any class I teach, I'm in no way comparing myself to Albert Einstein, but I love the Einstein quote. I don't teach my students. I just provide a space where they can learn. And that's how I look at teaching improv. It's like, I'm just here to share with you what I know and to show you some ways that this can happen, to see where you might feel comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it this way, fine, I get it. But at least you've seen that this is a way. And maybe later in your life, you might sit back and go, ooh, maybe that patience thing, maybe that's good, right? But I think it also comes with age. Joe and I used to talk about Bassprov. Like, there's no way we could have done Bassprov when we were 25. No way. We didn't start doing Bassprov till we were almost 40. And we had to have that experience. We had to have that, not only that improv experience, but that life experience to make that show real and patient and lyrical and make it work. If we'd tried to do that show when we were kids, we would have blown it. It would have been awful.
There is always a lot of talk among performers and especially teachers in schools about who, what, where. And there are those that are quick to embrace it, and there are others who are quick to throw it away. Where do you stand on who, what, where in scenes?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's like a lot of other stuff around improvisation. If it comes out because it's naturally the progression between you and I as two people in this moment playing this scene, if those elements come out, great. If I'm out there pushing those elements to try to make everybody okay, make sure the audience gets it, whatever, not great. That's how I look at it. I don't, like, for me, and I say this in class a lot, I don't ever want to do anything on a stage out of obligation. And I don't want to see my scene partner do anything out of obligation. I want to see them do things out of inspiration. So for me, that's where it gets tricky. I see so many younger improvisers, establishing an environment or a what or a where, just trying to be comfortable. And I get it because you're scared, but you don't need it. You don't need it if you're connected to the other person and you're okay with letting this organically come. And I know that's hard. So I can see the value early on, again, like a structure of a form. I can see the value of it giving you a little something to hold on to when things get nuts, because they're going to get nuts. But as you progress and get more comfortable in your skill, I don't think you need it. You'll know when you need it. You'll know when those elements need to come into the scene. And then they become more vital and more funny and more connecting and more powerful because you've been patient.
What differences do you notice in improv from the time that you started to what you see now?
There's a lot, because I've been doing it for like 30 years, right? There's a lot more diversity, not only in ethnicity, which is fantastic, in background, which is fantastic, in sexual orientation, which is fantastic. All of those things, I think, bring rich layers to the work. But there's also more diversity in thought and in just people willing to experiment with things. That's what I used to love about being the artistic director of CIF for the many years that I did it was like, when the first time I saw those guys in Hawaii do improvised kabuki, I was like, what? This is insane and it's awesome. Or the show that Asaf and Karen White did that's basically, silent, and it's all just these old physical theater techniques in a very stylized way with music in the back, and like that's the stuff that excites me. I want to see stuff that's like it. You don't have to make me laugh all the time. Make me interested. Show me show me something that I haven't seen before, or in a way that I haven't seen it. Unexpected. I love that. And I think there's more of that happening now in a lot of places.
Do you think that nowadays that's the carrot that gets people interested in jumping into this?
Maybe. I think for me, I always used to say that most people get drawn to improv because they see somebody else do it. Right? They see somebody else do it and they're like, man, that looks like fun. I want to do that. So I think exposing people to all those things, because there's people sitting out there who might see a normal, what we consider straight up long form, who are like, meh, but they might see something else. They might see Ruby Rocket, Stacy's show, and be like, ooh, that's super cool, right? I love the visual, I love the style, I love all that. So I think the more we show what the art form can do, even if it's not always quote unquote successful, just putting it out there, I think is huge.
I also enjoy watching you and Joe playing with Stacy in her show Ruby Rocket. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's such a blast to watch. When you're doing that show, like what's your mindset at? Because it's a very stylized show. It's a very film noir type of show, and it's beautiful. What mindset do you have when you go into that show with Stacy?
My main mindset is don't fuck it up. That's my that's my main mindset is this is her show, don't fuck it up. Right? So my whole idea is I'm going to give her a strong character to play off of, and I'm going to be in service of this piece as much as I can, right? And it goes back to some of those basic improv notions that we believe in so strongly. It's like I'm going to give you a strong energy to play off of, and I'm going to be in service of this piece, and we'll see what happens.
As you look back on your entire performance journey, what reflections come to you as you think about where you've been and where you've gotten to today?
Um, Never expected it to last this long. That's for sure, right? I mean, like I said, I started improvising in 1984, and this art form has provided me with so much. As you know, for the past 20 years, I've also done this on the corporate side. So I've traveled all over the world, and I've shown people who have never heard of improv before how thinking and acting a little more like an improviser can help them in so many different ways. And I think right now that's the thing that I like a lot is really sort of living up to that. To me, it's Martin's mission. Martin DeMott, who is one of my mentors, always believed that anybody could benefit. Anybody in the world could benefit from learning a little bit about improvisation. And in the corporate work that I do, I really feel like I'm connected to that. It's like, oh man, I'm going to walk into this room. I just did a session recently in North Carolina for some guys who work at a industrial boiler sales and service company, right? They're the sales and maintenance team. And, 36 guys from the Carolinas and Virginia, and you walk in there, and it's like, we're going to do a little improv, guys, and to have guys come up after that and be like, that was awesome. Like, I never thought about this. I never thought about listening in that way, or, all of those things. And it's like, cool. Like in those moments, I feel like, man, I'm helping that Martin DeMott mindset move forward into the world, and I love that. But I feel that way too when I teach. I hadn't taught theatrically in a while, and we did the festival in Ireland last year, Joe and I got to go in a room with a bunch of international improvisers and share some stuff for the first time in a long, long time. And I taught a couple Annoyance intensives this summer, and getting back into that, I was like, oh, that's right. I love this. I love it. I love being in that room with people who want to explore this. And I love being able to share things that might help them. Right. So, so that's one of my goals for 2024 as like I said, as my kids are getting older to get back out and do more of that, to reconnect with the art form more and get on stage a little more. And because every time I do it, I'm at that age. I talked to Susan Messing about this. We have coffee occasionally, and she's like, "Oh, are you going to do this thing, in a couple nights at Annoyance?" And I'm like, I could say yes, but I probably won't, because once I get home, it's like, nah. And she goes, you gotta. She goes, you should do it. She goes, I know exactly how you feel. She's like, I'm the same way. When you're thinking about doing it, you're like, no, no, no. But then when you get there, you're like, ah, oh, yes, yes. So I need to get past my own no a little more.
Well, I think it's safe to say, thank God you got dragged out to Chicago when you did.
Thank you.
And here's my final question for you, Mark.
All right.
And this can apply to anything you want it to apply to. What's the one piece of advice that has served you well that you want everyone else to hear?
Ooh, boy. The one piece of advice that has served me well. You know what? In the context of this, especially, there's a Miles Davis quote that I love, and it's sometimes you have to play a long time to learn how to sound like yourself. And I think that especially in improvisation, that's an important piece of advice. I think people get in a hurry. They want to be great fast. They want to be funny like this guy or that guy. And you really start getting good when you start settling into being okay being you on stage. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree, because that's exactly what I've been through. It's taken me a while to be comfortable in who I am.
Yeah, and that's where the truth comes, and that's where the funny comes, and that's where the vulnerability and the well, to coin your title, that's where the magic is, man. The magic is in you. It's not in the form. It's not in trying to emulate somebody else. That's what people want to see. They want to see that. Yeah.
Mark, I have had an absolutely wonderful time, and I hope you have too.
I have. This has been great.
Thank you so much, Mark, and wish you all the best in the future, my friend.
Thanks, buddy. We'll see you soon.
You don't have to be anybody else. You just have to be you. That is such an important lesson, not just in the arts, but in everything. Nothing is more special than seeing who you are. Thank you, Mark Sutton, for joining me today, and thank you very much for continuing to inspire and motivate. And of course, go Reds. Be sure to look up Mark Sutton sometime, and if you have the opportunity to take a class or a workshop with him, do yourselves a favor and do it. You will walk away a better and happier performer, I promise you. Thanks for tuning in today, everybody. Hope your day turns out well for you, and be sure to come back for more here on Improv and Magic. I'm LD, God bless, and see you next time.